Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we will be discussing with Anna Brix Thomsen about the unschooling of the school system. So this is a continuation to the various talks that we've had with her and many others with regards to our current education system and how it is not really functioning the way that we would have wanted it to be. And we've been discovering how it has been more of a detrimental tool and indoctrination tool for ourselves, not really to develop ourselves to our fullest potential. So there are emerging needs to change the schooling paradigm. So Anna, welcome to our Hangout today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Hi, Marlen. Hi, everyone.
So let's get on to this discussion to begin with. How have you approached education now from this perspective of unschooling? What is it really about?
Okay, so unschooling is a educational concept, you could say. It emerged in the 60s, and it was a guy called John Holt, who's like famous for coining the term unschooling. And there has since been like many authors and advocates. Sandra Dodd, people might know, as well as Ivan Illich, who has also talked about deschooling. So basically, unschooling is an educational approach where education is taken out of the school system. So basically, it is a completely different approach to education. Unschooling, usually because it's not happening in the education system, it is then a part also of homeschooling. Especially in the US, there are now very many people, millions of people who are homeschooling their children. But like homeschooling, if you homeschool your child in the traditional sense, it means that you bring the textbooks home and you have a sort of a little school simulation set up for your child, and the mother or the father will sit with the child. But with unschooling, there are no textbooks, there's no curriculum. Basically, it is self-directed learning where there's a trust in the child's interest and curiosity and ability to grow and learn with the guidance and support of the parent or the guardian.
So this comes like as a response to what has been noticed of the schooling system as more of an authoritarian type of system, or where there's a very marked type of hierarchy. So can you walk us through, first of all, in order to create the parallel of how one works in terms of the current schooling system and how this unschooling perspective is integrated within that schooling system?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different levels or dimensions that we can look at. One of them being that I'm sure that all of us, I mean, the fascinating thing about schooling and education is that there's not a single human being on the planet Earth who hasn't been through it in one way or another. Of course, there are people who are denied formal education, but most of us in the industrial countries have been through it. And we all, I'm sure, can remember, with a very few exceptions, the experience of being in school and how at a very young age we're taught to sit still, and we have these bodies that wants to move, and we're taught this if you even look at the classroom setup, it has been, I'm a sociologist, and so in sociology we also look at the setup of the classroom, for example, and how it's literally set up as a kind of a church, with the preacher, the teacher in the front, talking to their congregation and literally imposing, doctrine on them in a way. And so that would be like the one context is the actual experience of being in school, and how you as an individual is not really, you don't really exist, and it's all about stuffing as much information as possible into your head, whether you like it or not. I mean, I'm sure many people can relate to that. But then there's also like a dark, more systemic side of it, which is something that a lot of people might not be aware of, which is the whole starting point of the public education system, or the formal education system as we know it, in terms of how it emerged and how it was actually deliberately created by the elite of the world to control the masses. And so what is known and that we read in school as this wonderful story about how public education became available to everyone It's actually also a story about how an indoctrination system was put in place that sought to segregate people, that sought to actually dumb them down, as John Taylor Gatto says, as the school system does not encourage a full growth of our intellect, of our creativity. It is very restrictive, and it's very limited in terms of what you are allowed to learn and how you are allowed to learn. There is this one-size-fits-all model that I'm sure any parent, any teacher, any one of us will be familiar with, that it's not, it doesn't work for everyone.
And even more so, there is always this stigma toward, children's experience in school is always not the best one. There is this idea of enforced education, which is how the schooling system is perceived. So can you walk us through how then you apply unschooling as a principle, a set of practices, practically speaking, in also your practice, because you're a teacher, you're a sociologist, as a reference for our viewers as well. So how is it practically eaten, so to speak?
Yeah, so to share a little bit of background, I actually grew up being educated in an alternative school myself, in a Freinet school. Freinet was a French educator and philosopher who had this very distinct principle about how children want to be productive. Children want to create meaningful lives for themselves, even though they're children. And that one of the problems with formal education is that it's this kind of simulation that doesn't have anything to do with real life. And so the school that I went to as a child, it, for example, wasn't age segregated, that the way that we see schools now, where you only go into a class with people your own age, something that is very limiting for your educational experience. So the school I went to class with kids of all kinds of ages, and we didn't have a traditional curriculum. And so I think that kind of sparked my interest for alternative forms of education, and education in general. And then growing up, I decided to go into education, and first I became a preschool teacher, and then when I went into the field and into the preschools, I was absolutely shocked at specifically the way that I saw the teachers approaching education. It was very boring, to say. I mean, that was my experience. It was really boring, and I just saw how much more it could be. But at the time, I didn't have any vocabulary, like I didn't know how to approach it. And so I actually decided to continue studying and to go into a more systemic way, or more academic way, you could say, to actually study the education system and learn how it works, learn its history. So I studied educational sociology. And after that, after I took a master in educational sociology, I decided that I needed to get back into the practical world and gain some more experience. So the past almost 4 years, I've been working as a teacher. And it's really interesting, actually, and quite indicative, because in these 4 years, I've learned more about education than I have in my entire career of educating myself to become a teacher, a preschool teacher, and a sociologist. Because being in the education system, and specifically being in the traditional public education system, I've seen all of this that I've been talking about, the authoritarianism, the effect that education has on children. And so through these years, I've been looking at practical ways to implement an alternative, and not only doing it in terms of, because the thing with unschooling, for example, is that within that you completely remove yourself from the education system, and you say, I'm going to take my children out of school because this is just not working, this is unacceptable, I won't let my child be exposed to this. It's very brutal, which is something that I can completely understand. But at the same time, we also have this education system. It's not going to go anywhere right now. And so I've been looking at how can I contribute with what I see and with what I would like to do to make a difference within the school system. And yeah.
Yeah, that's such a very important and very aligned with the principles that we advocate in the Equal Life Foundation, which is all about changing the system from within, hacking the system from within, so that wherever you see a flaw in the system, you actually become aware of it, you study it, and you then become part of it, an integral part of it, so that you can start changing it from within. So not so much stepping outside and maybe just completely forgetting about the existence of schools, but you're actually a teacher that is within the system and implementing these new principles. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm working with this on a daily basis. Basically, when I took this job, and at the time I didn't realize the impact that this decision would have on my life and on my career and also on my work. But when I took this job as a teacher, I decided in that moment that I'm going to become the best teacher that I can possibly be. And I know that this sounds corny, but it has really made a difference in terms of how every day I look at how I can better myself and how I can provide these kids with a substantial, sound education. And so, for example, what I do is that if they're bored, I don't, and I have experience, for example, becoming irritated or annoyed, but I don't blame them. I don't think, oh, kids are just so unruly. There is this like weird stigma towards children that they're somehow evil. It's not something that we say out loud, but there's this idea that they're these wild savages that needs to be tamed. And so especially as teachers, we very easily become these like angry, bitter people that just say no all the time. And I could just see like, I don't want to become that kind of person. And the most devastating part of that is that you just see this light of wanting to learn just gets put out in the eyes of these kids when they are being put down and when they're being told, you know, that they cannot ask questions, for example. So if I see that they're bored, I go home after a day of work and then I look at, okay, why were they bored? What did I do? What did I bring to the table that caused them to be bored and not want to do the work? And so one of the first things that I discovered was that, especially with the younger kids, is that they need learning to be physical. It is horrible for them to sit down the entire day. It's completely unnatural. And so in having this like fight with them, you know, sit still, listen, no, it becomes a very unpleasant experience for everyone. So I realized, okay, I can start implementing some physical activities into the lessons. You know, let's get up, stand up, take a walk. And in this is also challenging my own beliefs as a teacher of what education is supposed to be. You know, there is this idea that it's supposed to be sitting still with a piece of paper or a computer and solving some task, and then, you know, you get your mark and then you're done. And in the beginning it was actually a little bit daunting to let go of that traditional way of doing it. And then I have since gone from that, you know, slowly but surely letting go of this idea of having to get results and controlling the situation, to letting completely go and implementing these radical unschooling principles into my teaching.
Okay, so we'll go into, you know, discussing more about the nitty-gritty details of what unschooling is. To remind our viewers, there are comments and questions that you can place for Anna throughout the transmission of this live hangout. We will be talking for about another half an hour. So we have a comment that I cannot read because it's in Arabic. If you can place it in English, that would be great. Thanks for watching though, and I hope you're understanding this topic and conversation. So
it looks
Anna,
beautiful though, the Arabic
yeah,
letter.
I know. It's quite amazing. So
Yeah.
Anna, I'd like to ask you about some aspects that I got to hear about from Dana Martin, who she has spoken a little bit about unschooling. So I'd like to reference what's your perspective on some things that she said, such as that rules are for lazy parents. What is the role of rules in unschooling?
Yeah, so I mean, there is this, you could say, this unschooling argument, and then the people that are fiercely against unschooling. So with the people that are fiercely against unschooling, the idea is that it is just like people who just let their kids do whatever they want, and there's no authority. And then you could say the response from someone like Dana Marlen, for example, who's very active on YouTube, is explaining, that it's not. Well, it's about taking authority completely out of the parent-child relationship, and something that she's, for example, said, it's about letting the child be completely free. And so in their house, they have a vlogging channel. Just for reference, I know that there are other unschoolers who have different perspectives, and I'm certainly not here to make myself an expert on it. So this is just based on what I've seen. And so what I like about that perspective is that rules are seldom explained to children. They can be very arbitrary, and they can be based on the parents' needs. So let's say the parent creates a rule that the child has to go to bed by 9 o'clock. Honestly speaking, I'm sure many parents can admit to the fact that they do that, not necessarily so much for the child's sake, but because they really want and need some time by themselves in the evening, which, I mean, makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem comes in when a rule is enforced that it's not, like, let's say the child at 9 o'clock is not at all tired. And that, I mean, most of us have been exposed to this kind of fuzzy logic throughout our childhood, where parents and adults introduce rules to us that doesn't make any sense, or that is not in alignment with what is actually best for us as children. And it can be very difficult to speak up as a child. And so because you're in this authoritarian relationship, the parents get to decide and have power. And so in unschooling, a very, you can say, empathic principle is that you look at what is best for the entire family. You look at what is best for all the members in the household. There is a principle of equality in that, where the child and the parents are not in this power struggle where the parent gets to automatically decide. And so when she says that rules are for the lazy parent, it means that when you remove the rules, you have to actually also look at yourself. You have to maybe do some things that you would prefer not to do, but that are best for your child. It may be more challenging. So if we go back to the situation with the child that is wide awake at 9 o'clock and the adult that is super tired, you now then have to, as an unschooling parent who works with respect for your child's needs, you have to now find a solution and be creative and say, how can I have my need met of being exhausted and wanting some time for myself, and then the child being awake, which, I mean, I find that it is very cool, but it's definitely something that requires us as parents to take much more directive responsibility for our parenting, and also admit, we have to maybe swallow some camels in that context, and realize that we've been using this power and claiming that, well, it is best for children to go to bed at 9 o'clock, but really it was because we wanted that time for ourselves, Yeah.
So that is very much considering that principle of what would be best for everyone, not just following as you were mentioning, my need of resting, and kind of only considering my needs, and not really taking full responsibility for the parents. So just to clarify here, because you're speaking about the home environment, so unschooling as a set of principles can be applied to and within the schooling system and at home. Is that correct?
Well, I actually haven't heard of anyone else who's doing unschooling in the school system. Maybe there are. I think there are probably teachers who are doing it, maybe even without knowing it. I certainly was. Basically, I've been an unschooler my entire life without knowing it, because I've always stood by these principles. So, I mean, it's a paradox, because the whole principle of unschooling is to remove the school system from the child's education. But now, look, I live in a country where homeschooling is illegal. So even if I wanted to homeschool my children, it's just not possible. So I don't have a choice. If I want to do unschooling in any capacity, I have to do it within the school system. So maybe we need to come up with a new word for it. I've called myself a guerrilla teacher, because I'm trying to be innovative and bring like changes to the system from within. But yes, I will say that it is possible to do unschooling in the school system, but the way that I have experienced it and the way that I have done it is that it's only possible to do as an individual teacher, because otherwise we are going into systemic changes, which is on a that's a completely different ball game. When you talk about changing paradigms and changing curriculums and changing, that means a total reform, and I would say that that's a much more political form of activism that is definitely also relevant, but it's a much longer process that requires more people, more resources. But the way that I work with unschooling is something that every teacher can do. And I would even say that it's something everyone can do, because what I do is that I change my approach, I change my starting point. And as long as the requirements are met in terms of what the children have to learn. In my case, it's a language, and they do. And I to the parents, we kind of have a little giggle, and I call it sneaky language, because they learn grammar, they learn to write, they learn to speak, but they kind of don't always realize it. Sometimes they tell me, like, we're having so much fun, when are we going to learn this language? And I'm like, you already are. You're speaking, you're writing, we're talking about the grammar. And then they're like, huh.
Interesting.
So learning, yeah. So, I mean, yeah.
From the perspective of kind of looking at schooling or education with a different set of eyes, so to speak, that is also injecting some life into the education system, because it's always so dull and so boring. And we actually have a comment from this by Lainey Liberti, and she's saying, I'm so excited to hear Anna speak. I was wondering about the connection between freedom and boredom in a classroom and how that looks in your experience. And to clarify, Anna lives in Sweden, so just for context as well.
Are you saying that it's a more boring country? Well, maybe
no, meaning that homeschooling is prohibited there, so that's why you're doing the homeschooling within the system.
Yeah, well, okay, so over the past few months specifically, this is still like, I'm still experimenting. This is still a new process for me, in terms of putting words on having unschooling as a principle that I was doing instinctively and intuitively before, but I didn't know there was a word for it. And now I'm finding all these amazing resources. And so in the beginning, it was extremely daunting. And something that came up that actually was like, that stopped me in a way in the beginning was the fear of the parents and the other teachers, you know, thinking that I was doing it wrong. And, you know, why aren't they getting any homework? And what, to my amazement, the exact opposite thing has happened. I get emails and phone calls from parents that are saying that their kids love our classes. They absolutely love it. They can't wait. I have a 5th grader who's never done homework before, and he, without any, like, I don't even tell him to do anything, he just sends it to me. And I was talking to his older sister, and she was like, he's never done homework before. And he just kept on writing and writing and writing, and I actually had to stop him because for what we were doing, it was a little bit too long. And that was such a cool, confirmation that I can absolutely trust this process without a doubt. The students are students that before were like grumpy and resisting. They are helpful. They show up every time. They do like they don't get traditional homework in the sense that, you know, they have to take this and complete it. It's like projects that we then agree on that they will work with at home, basically. But they do it, and they're proud of what they do, and they look forward to showing it to me. And for example, right now we're working on a project on computer games, because I've really been looking at how to focus on their interests and what they want to do. And if they, for example, say to me that they don't want to be there, I don't force them to stay. I mean, they're free to go. There's not going to be a consequence if they leave the classroom. And so I knew that like 90% of my students, they are really seriously into gaming. Computer games is their favorite thing to do in the whole world. And I had a colleague who developed this mini curriculum with computer games. And so I'm introducing that to them. And basically the older students, they're working with creating their own fantasy computer game. And then I've actually gotten in contact with game developers and found a game developer who would be interested in coming and talking to them and see the games that they have developed. And they are so excited about that, because this passion that they have for computer games is something that has never been taken seriously. And by most adults, it's something that's seen as like an obstacle for their learning. And suddenly what they feel passionate about is being respected and is being seen as something valuable and worthy, and that they can do something with in their future if they want. So I don't have to tell them to do anything. They just do it. And if they don't, like there are students who are like, I'm not into computer games at all. Okay, then we'll do something else. And changing that, like my own little teaching paradigm in my little classroom has completely transformed my teaching experience, and as far as I can see, the kids' learning experience as well. And I'm quite astounded by it, and how little it has taken. Just me changing and letting go of that control. And we're having so much fun. Sometimes we're laughing so loud that we're like, you know, I'm afraid that the other teachers are going to get mad at us, which is like, that's so, you know, it shouldn't be like that, you know, that we're enjoying ourselves so much that it kind of, you know, that we have to put a damper on it.
That's actually great feedback, and all I can say is that it would be great to have more teachers also hearing about this and letting go of that fear of, oh, what will my peers will say, or what will the principal will tell me, because that is like a constant fear that prevents us from doing these minimal changes that really change the entire experience of children, as you're mentioning. And that kind of feedback is the kind of human beings that we really want to continue, you know, supporting as well as children, to become inventive, creative, innovative, and to become curious in the way that they can be given a set of tools to work with and develop themselves further, which is what we would also like to redefine the whole educational paradigm to be. So thanks for that question and point as well.
I just wanted to add to that I've been very surprised to see an entirely new dimension open up in my relationship with the kids that I didn't even expect. You know, I was going into this unschooling journey, you could say, and there has opened up this intimacy where they've actually started like sharing themselves with me. Because something that I experienced and that I was very frustrated about was that the kids weren't authentic. I could see that they were just seeing me as yet another adult who's coming into their life to tell them what to do. And the entire school system is like this weird simulation where we're pretending like it's reality and that it matters, but everyone knows that it really doesn't. And you're just sitting there waiting till the clock ticks and you can go out. And I could see that they were seeing me this way. And since I've started just completely letting go of control and listening to them, really listening to them, they have started, like their real, who they really are, have started coming forth. And they share about their lives with me. And it has made my work so much more gratifying and, you know, really awesome. And I think that this is something that everyone can do in one way or another. Whether you're a teacher or a parent, or even if you have a completely different job, you can apply the same principles, at least to some extent.
What's your perspective on becoming too complacent to, you know, children's curiosity? You know, being too lax to the point where there are no principles or there are no guidelines. How do you manage this?
Yeah, so I would say a really good guideline, first of all, is what I talked about before with how the basic principle in our interaction is the principle of what is best for all. So it's not just about, you know, the child just doing whatever they want, because, and then you as a parent, for example, start sacrificing yourself or get hurt, or that it's uncomfortable for you. I mean, you also have to consider yourself as the parent or the adult in it. You equally have to be there, because I think that's actually something that can happen, is that then you go to the other extreme, and then maybe the child even becomes a kind of an authority in a way. So that's like the first point. And then the other point I would also like to say is that at the moment, there is no such thing as pure free will. It would be really cool if there was. But when we as human beings want things, high heels shoes or Coke or kale or whatever, most of the wants and needs and desires that we have, and even the fears, it comes from somewhere. So a lot of it comes from the media and from, you know, other, you know, learning from other people. And so when, you know, this idea of giving children complete freedom, from my perspective, it often isn't really freedom, because what they'll want is already predetermined. It's already pre-programmed from watching advertisements or commercials or whatever. And I'm not saying that the solution is then to completely restrict them from media, because, you know, then you'll just be doing it, you know, you could be doing it with books, with fairy tales. So then instead, from my perspective, it's about the parent being a guide. And you know, we've lived longer, and so we've seen more. But this is not even a given. It's not a given that we can be that guide. And so the very first step is that we as adults have to work with ourselves. And that is the process of deschooling, which is the process where we have to heal ourselves, so to speak. We have to investigate our own belief systems, whether there are ideas about health, or in my case, I had this idea about what education was supposed to be that I was afraid of letting go of. Because it is from there, like having a clear platform, having a clear starting point, that we will be able to stand as pillars for our children, so that, you know, whatever the subject is, sugar or violent movies or whatever, we can discuss it with them, and they can have access to it and approach it. But we will be able to be there to assist them to develop critical assessment skills and critical thinking, so that it's not just about like gorging on the world, like, you know, just taking it as much in as possible, but to also learn how to like feel your body's limits. Does it hurt when you eat all that candy? Maybe next time you should eat 3 instead of 20, you know, stuff like that, like basic common sense.
Yeah, I see this process as very much in alignment with a process of developing self-awareness, which is getting to know yourself, getting to know your place in the world. And so breaking the paradigm, no longer being defined by everything that you've been taught is how things are, and making it immovable, but actually having the realization that I can influence here, I can change how things operate, and I can change my participation in it, which is also what we're doing with proposing, you know, economic, social, and political solutions. We are going through the past limitations of how it always has worked and proposing new ideas. So you're a clear example of that, and thanks for sharing that. So we have a question to you, for you, Anna, and it's from Gabriela Seves, and he's saying, Anna, what would you say that has been the most important aspect in your personal process to realize and understand the way to implement this new dynamic that you are taking to your very daily work?
Okay, so well, there are a couple of aspects that I would say. First of all, I would say that it's been like a process of exploring, allowing myself to explore. So go and test something out practical. And then because I'm a sociologist, I have learned through my education to assess information to look at it in a sociological kind of or philosophical kind of way. So to look at relationships and patterns and human nature and like, why are these dynamics in this group this way? So when I come home, or like on the bus or whatever, I reflect. It's not something I'm like, okay, it's 4 o'clock now, it's time to reflect. It just like automatically happens, like, I wonder why that kid reacted that way. So what was I experiencing at the moment? I was a little bit irritated, or I wanted to get out of the door. Maybe I affected, like, so, and then if I see that, okay, I have to take on that one, they needed to run around and I try and get them to sit still. Okay, next time I go there, I'm gonna try letting them run over the place. I'm gonna not have any control, and I've done that. I'm like, okay. And they're like, it worked. So it's like a trial and error process, experimentation, like what works, what doesn't work. So that's one point of it. And then I would say the other point of it is to take absolute responsibility. And this is specifically because I'm working with children, and how easily that they're influenced. And this is something that I think is really tough for adults to admit. But like all this schooling stuff that we've learned, not even just from school, but also from our own families and lives, like little nasty remarks or spitefulness or judgments that we don't even realize, it affects them. And that's something that is so important to be able to catch and go, okay, that was a snarky remark. Where does that come from? Why did I do that? And to change it. And it's, I can't say that it's not going to happen, but to at least be aware of it and to take responsibility for it when it does happen. Yeah, so that most important thing is, and in that, interestingly enough, within saying I am absolutely fully responsible for this situation, within saying that, I've actually also had the power, or given myself the power to change it, to say, okay, but what if we did things completely differently? Instead of going like, oh my God, these children are so horrible, they're just bad children. Oh, okay, like I'm sure some people do, because they don't know what else to do. And then the situation just escalates and continues. So within taking responsibility, within admitting and saying that I am responsible, I also have a responsibility to change the situation. And then, kind of magic happens, like new things I never even knew was possible opens up. So that's the gift.
Yes, and this also enables us to take the point back to ourselves, meaning not blaming the system or the curriculum that you have to follow, or the schooling system in itself for placing you as a teacher there and with these kids, because that is, once again, blaming. So within the starting point of who we are also as Equal Life Foundation, and you being part of it, is precisely to recognize one's ability to change things, test it out, find out what works, what doesn't work. So there is a lot of self-introspection work that many times we completely overlook, and we believe that someone else has to tell us how to remediate the situation. And you're proving that it is not about that, but actually developing that self-awareness on how to change it. So cool for that approach, Anna. And we have another question from Joanna Jesus. She's saying, great hangout. It strikes me to see that 6-year-old children who love to learn new things are now having resistance to school, lots of homework, and playing became like an escape. How is the system creating stress and school sickness in children?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, and it's very pertinent. I've started seeing this a lot, and this has started happening specifically here in Europe, at least since they started implementing national testing. The kids are extremely stressed. I've had a 7-year-old 1 grader who almost went down, she almost, got sick with stress, so that the mom had to keep her at home because of all this homework. And the school system, look, in the 70s, I mean, I can mostly talk about the European example. I know a lot about the American school system, but I haven't really been in it, or at least I'm talking about the North Europeans. So in the 70s, there was this very, the school system was starting to become a lot more boheme, and they were trying out a lot of new methods and whatever. And so then it was in the late 80s, they implemented these, they did these testings of all over the world of the kids' ability to read and write and do math. And they were absolutely shocked that the kids were apparently so bad at reading and writing. And so they blamed that on this so-called hippie school system that had come up from the 70s that was much more free, less authoritarian, giving power to the children. And so since the start of the 1990s, there's been all these reforms that has brought the hard subjects back into school. Many schools, they don't have art anymore. They don't have music. They've taken out like field excursions, also due to budgets, because the schools aren't given any money from the government. And so it's all of that. And then you have the global competition system, and like what they're calling the knowledge economy, where the most paid workers now are people who have a lot of knowledge. So there are a lot of things happening that is just going more and more and more in the direction of the system. And now I'm not like blaming anyone in particular. It's it's just how it's come to be. The system wanting people to be like robots, like drones, who there's no like individual development or individual consideration in it. There are a lot of teachers who try, and there are also a lot of politicians who try, but the general direction is towards a very dehumanizing system, and it has its effects, because we are not robots, we aren't machines. What I've seen that is so devastating is that what I found is that each child has its own individual needs and learning requirements. Some children need quiet, some children take longer, some children are super fast. And the school system just does not in any way accommodate for that. There's no room for individual expression. It's just like this one fast track, and it's not even really about learning. I mean, it's so tragic. The system, or because I don't want to say the teachers, because they're often also just, they're also just happen to be there. But the system that we've all created together is not interested in children learning, is not interested in children exploring their utmost potential and expression, is not interested in human beings growing up to have integrity and critical thinking and the ability to take care of their environment. And that is something that we should question, because what world is it that we're creating from this system? Sorry, I got a cat in my face.
Yes, and I would also would like to remind our viewers to watch our previous Hangouts with Anna, where we discuss also the politics of our education and developing children from the get-go as political. Yeah. Yes, and so Common Core as well, so we will leave links to all of that. So Anna, we are about to wrap up this Hangout, but before we go, I'd like to ask you about making the world our school, so to speak, our learning ground. How would you say we can apply some of these unschooling principles, even if we are not having a teacher like yourself or in a schooling system per se? What can you recommend to us?
Okay, so my perspective on that is that education happens all the time, everywhere, even for adults. Obviously, if we just do the same thing every day and we don't ever explore anything new, we don't maybe learn so much. And I mean, for children, everything is education. Opening doors, baking, going to the supermarket, walking down the streets, looking at trees, everything is education. And that is something that is not to be underestimated. And children are interested in everything. But the thing is that it's us as adults that have these like fixed ideas about where and how and with who education is supposed to happen. And I think also many parents feel inferior. They don't realize the resource that they have and the things that they know. So like for example, I know about making videos. video editing. And so I used that skill and showed my students how to do that, and they really liked it. Or maybe about sewing or knitting or whatever, but as parents and as adults, we have many skills that we can show our children and have them participate with. So I would say, as a parent, to not underestimate that, and then as people in general, to kind of humble ourselves and open ourselves up to realizing that education happens all the time. It also happens when we sit and watch TV all night. We also learn something about life from that, or going dancing or whatever. But what I find to be inspiring, or you could say expanding, is to have the awareness, so that when you wake up and when you go into the world, you have this perspective of, what am I going to learn today? Or what do I have? What gifts can I learn today? What, to be open to people that you meet who might look differently from you. Consider the fact that they have an entire life inside of them. They might have resources and stories and things that you never even knew existed. So to be humble and to gain back that desire to learn that was and that still is within us, that is what I would recommend. And that's something that everyone can do for themselves right here, right now.
And I will also direct everyone to read Anna's blogs at teachersjourneytolife.com, where she writes more in depth into all of these aspects that she applies for herself and also the effects of it. So Anna, thank you very much also for being an example and sharing with us what can be done within the system, because that is a starting point of real world change, where you simply instigate that change even with seemingly small points and really getting the effect of that. And thanks for sharing about all of this today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
So to our viewers, I know that there's a bunch of questions more in relation to schooling in itself. Today, the topic was more about learning of unschooling. We will have further chats with other individuals about the flaws in the current schooling system in America, so stay tuned for that. And to our viewers, also reminding them to subscribe to this channel and to keep in contact with us if you'd like to also participate in one of these live hangouts, as well as tuning in next Sunday for another live edition of the Living Income Guaranteed Hangout. Thanks, Anna, and see you next time.
Bye, guys.